So you want to get into medicine. Sure, being a doctor can be an incredible career with some amazing experiences and opportunities, but getting into medical school can be very challenging, competitive, time-consuming, and not to mention costly, often taking students multiple admission cycles and several years just to get into medical school. When you're applying to get into medical school, it's often thrown around that getting in is actually the hard part and med school itself is not as bad. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to that, but look, as someone who didn't get into medical school the first time around, there definitely are some things that you can do to swing the odds back into your favor and give you an even better chance of getting into medical school. My name's Adam, I'm a junior doctor from Australia, and in this video I wanted to break down some of the things that helped me in my journey to getting into medical school and some tips that I hope will help you in your own journeys as well. And as I've said in previous videos, there are often three main elements that medical schools will consider when separating prospective students. And these are either grades from a previous degree or from high school. Secondly, an admissions exam of some capacity, whether that be the GAMSAT for postgraduate medicine in Australia and the United Kingdom, or the UCAT for undergraduate students applying for medicine in similar regions, or the MCAT, which is of course used in the United States and Northern America and also more universally as well. And of course, any other random combination of acronyms and letters that might be relevant for your admissions process. And then lastly, often medical schools will involve some sort of interview, whether that be a multi-meeting interview or a panel interview or a one-on-one interview, some sort of interview that helps discern the different types of students and your personality, and often gives you a platform to kind of express things beyond what's written on a piece of paper. And of course, medical schools will look at other things like resumes, extracurricular activities, statements of intent, the famous written piece of paper of why I wanted to do medicine, and those sorts of things give medical schools another lever to help separate students from one another. And from looking on the outside in, it sounds like a crazy process with multiple barriers, multiple hurdles for students to actually get into medical school. And it can seem a bit overwhelming, but in saying that, there are definitely things that students can do and implement to help give them a better chance of getting into medical school. So let's start with grades. Well, grades can look different for every student trying to get into medical school. And when it comes to grades, whether it's your GPA, your WAM, your SATs, your ATARs, your A-levels, whatever you want to call them, there are some things that apply generally across the board. And the first and most important thing to understand is that grades are kind of a reflection of your performance on a longitudinal scale, whether you like it or not. And the thing to realize here is that there's kind of no getting around it. You do have to kind of have sustained performance and consistency over time, which is something that's really difficult to achieve, obviously, but that can kind of work into your favor, which brings me on to the next point. And this is perhaps something that I found difficult in my early days of biomedical science, which was my undergraduate degree before studying medicine, which is efficient study habits. And how efficient you can study in your own time is probably one of the most important things when it comes to getting, good overall marks. And it's because at the end of the day, it's a long period of time that you're going to be studying for. One, you don't want to burn out, and two, you want to be able to spend the time that you do spend studying in the most efficient way possible, because you want to be able to get the most bang for your buck, right? For me personally, I was a slave to inefficient study habits and comparing myself to other people and doing all the things that they tell you shouldn't do. And I wasn't studying smart, I was studying hard, but without the kind of reward on exam day, because I was probably studying in the wrong way to get that information to stay in my brain. So to save all that disappointment, you really need to lock down how you study. So far we've covered consistency and we've covered effective study habits. I think the third thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was competitiveness, because as I said before, it's a really common theme in medical school or in trying to get into medical school. I think it's really normal to want to be competitive and score better than the people around you. Having said that, it's important that this doesn't kind of affect the way you interact with other people and affect the culture of the group and the people around you. And that kind of leads on to the next point, because group study and studying with other people is probably one thing that I'd absolutely recommend. One, it just changes up the kind of cadence of your study, and two, it just kind of brings in a more social environment, and three, I think it just stops you from burning out overall. People often bring different ideas, and when you're in a group setting, you're often more likely to all do well. It's really easy to get tunnel visioned and really focused on what the next exam is on the next assessment date, but group study kind of helps you take the load off a little bit and change up the pace and the style of your study. When it comes to the GAMSAT or particular admissions exam, there's a lot of uncertainty that's not taught in a curriculum in the same way that you're taught in university or in high school. Being around other groups of people allows you to get little hints of what the exam's like, learn from other people's experiences and people who have sat it before, and bring that into your own study to give you a better understanding of maybe how to approach things a bit differently. And I don't think I would have scored as well as I did without having study groups and without being around other people, to break up my study. Now, as I said before, nearly all medical schools will make applicants sit at least some form of admission exam prior to applying for medical school. And most of these exams, yes, you can sit multiple times, but we'll have limited sittings throughout the year, maybe even only one sitting throughout the year, really kind of piling the pressure on students to study and pour all they can into sitting one exam that can potentially be as meaningful or as impactful as 3 to 5 to 7 years of study to get a GPA. So yeah, it can feel that there's a lot riding on this one exam that you really don't want to study for, you really don't want to sit. It's an absolute headache. It's totally different to maybe what you're studying normally. At the end of the day, is really important to giving you the best chance of getting into medical school. These tests can be scary, and I've dedicated a bunch of videos on my channel already to how to best prepare for the GAMSAT. So no doubt there are definitely things that you can do to give yourself the best chance of scoring well in these exams. And probably my first piece of advice would be smart. And this is kind of, yes, involves effective study habits, but also just be smart with your whole preparation. Often students will ask me like, how long should I spend studying for these admission exams? My sitting is in March, it's June the previous year. Do I start studying now? Do I start studying, 5 months, 3 months, 1 month before? How much time do I actually need to dedicate to this? But it also varies person to person and what your strengths are and what baseline you're starting at. But the bottom line is, one, you want to spend enough time studying so that you can study and prepare. And it's a fine line between getting all the information and time and preparation you can to prepare for the exam, but also not studying too much for too long to the point where you burn yourself out and you get to exam day and you're just like, I cannot use my brain anymore, I can't fit any more information in. So try and think about those things before going into it. The other thing when it comes to these sorts of exams is often most students will sit them multiple times and they are expensive. There's preparation materials, the exam itself, which often can be hundreds of dollars, and the prep material, which can cost like thousands if it's something that you commit to. So it can be often really hard to find affordable and free material to study with. I have a few things for the GAMSAT, which you can find in the description below. There are some more resources online for, different admissions exams. If you really dig and do your research, you'll find things on Reddit and Google, and YouTube is a great resource as well, where people run through different parts of that exam, different question types, they give their own feedback and experiences, and any form of study or resource that you can get your hands on is going to go a long way. At the end of the day, a lot of people will often come to me and say like, is it worth it? Is it worth paying all this money for one of these preparation courses? And I say, yeah, it depends what you want to get out of it. I think if you're having the expectation that you're going to sign up for one of these courses and just by signing up and going through everything that they give you, you're going to score really well. But if you don't have your own study time, then it's not going to be implemented, and these skills that you're learning in the course aren't actually going to translate on exam day. So I think there is just a bit of reality there that people need to understand. I just wanted to touch on a couple more things. The first being planning in advance. When it comes to these admissions exams, it's so important to have a structured plan of your study so that you can study effectively and know exactly what you want to achieve come exam day. When it came down to my GAMSAT preparation, I allowed a few months to prepare for the exam itself. And when I was doing that, I basically wrote out a calendar week by week, month by month, planning out what I wanted to achieve within each of those timeframes. And that allowed me to ensure my preparation was really structured and that I wasn't rocking up to study and just doing things for the sake of doing things. Now, finally, let's get stuck into talking about the interview. Don't sleep on the interview. Too many people think that they can just rock up on interview day and just wing it and talk their way through it and feel like they're confident enough to be able to give really clear answers. And sure, there are people that can do that, but at the end of the day, the assessors are looking for specific things that you'll only really be able to do if you have prepared for the interview and if you have that sort of knowledge coming into the interview itself. Now, the next piece of advice I can give you when it comes to interviews is don't try to stand out. And what do I mean by that exactly? I think the best way of you being able to give the best performance on interview day is by being yourself. And when we try too hard to stand out, we often lean towards becoming someone that we're not. And interviewers can really see through that. It's not hard to fool, one interviewer, but with multi-minute interviews, it's really hard to fool 10 interviewers. Authenticity is incredibly important when it comes to these interviews, and it's what assessors are looking out for. If you're being inauthentic, it can really make or break your whole admission process. And so in saying that, my biggest piece of advice would be to practice and prepare as much much as you can. Practice with literally anyone that will listen. I think it's easy to say that when it comes to practicing for these interviews that you run the risk of over practicing and seeming too well rehearsed, but I think that the benefits of preparing for your interview far outweigh the risks of not preparing enough or at all. So then begs the question, what do you actually prepare for when it comes to these interviews? So there are a few things to really focus on. The first being the actual content of the different questions that they'll be asking you. One particular question style, particularly in the multi-minute interviews, are ethics style questions. And these questions won't actually stop in medical school, because you'll get these sorts of similar ethical encounters, ethical dilemmas in interviews come, when you're applying for internship, residency, and jobs going forward. They're really important in terms of ascertaining someone's clinical decision making and seeing whether they can be responsible and professional when the time comes. Now you might think, look, these ethical scenarios are very random and there's not often a pattern to it, but I think that the more that you practice, you develop your own structure in how to answer these questions effectively and appropriately, and you kind of bring a few techniques into play in order to be able to answer them more confidently. And when it comes to the knowledge base behind these questions, I think it would be worthwhile reviewing some of the main core ethical principles, because they're often the ethical principles that guide these clinical decisions that you're faced with in the interviews. Now, the next question style that you often get asked is around public health and some of the core issues in your own health system. So I think it'd be worthwhile looking up what are the key public health issues that are facing your community at the moment, and what are the key public health themes that you can kind of include in your response. Now, the second thing to really focus on is confidence. And this kind of comes hand in hand with practice, because you'll develop more confidence the more you prepare for your interview. Now, things like maintaining eye contact or having a confident and clear tone of voice are really important to ensure that you get your point across effectively, and that the assessor sees you as someone that's really thoughtful and intentional with your responses. And the more confident you feel in yourself, the better you're going to perform on the actual interview day. And these are nerve-wracking situations. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous going into my interview. It's incredibly daunting, but I honestly think that preparation goes a long way to doing really well in these interviews. And so ultimately, the reason for making this video was because I often get asked by people, what can I do to improve my chances of getting into medicine? And I think that there are so many different things that you can do, and there's not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to medical applications, because everyone's different, everyone has their own strengths and things that will make them stand out. So it's really about accentuating those and then trying to improve the things that you can work on. But yeah, I hope you found this advice helpful. It was general advice at the end of the day, but really important core principles to focus on when it comes to medical school applications. As usual, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I try to respond to pretty much every question that comes up. And if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like it and subscribe. It really helps me to grow this channel. But until next time, I'll see you very soon.